Hi, and welcome to this first video of three videos we've made together with Professor Simon Mitchell. It was a recorded podcast that went on for quite a bit of while, so I decided to make three separate videos. In this first video, we'll talk about the contributing factors we have to take into account when planning our decompression, other than the depth and time profile. So let's jump right in and we'll look at what Professor Simon Mitchell has to say.
All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Jeff Seckendorf, CEO of UTD Scuba Diving, and here as always with our training director, Ben Boss. Hey, Ben.
Hey everyone.
And crazy special guest this evening, Simon Mitchell. Hey, Simon.
Hi Jeff, how are you?
We're good. And as always, we're spread out, but this time even more. So I'm in San Diego, Ben's in Denmark, and Simon's in New Zealand. So we have
Yeah,
time zones, date lines, all this other crazy stuff that actually got us all on the same call at the same time. So that
yeah,
was
it's
really good.
actually morning at your place, Simon, isn't it? And it's evening here, and you're midday.
I'm ready for
Jeff.
lunch. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's too early for a glass of wine.
Mm.
So we're going to talk about decompression and elements of around decompression and gas, different the relationships of decompression to different gases, CO2, helium. We're going to talk about deep stops and have a little discussion about that, and then the rest of it we'll just see where it goes. So, Simon, can you just start with a quick introduction for those of you who have not yet met you?
Yeah, sure, Jeff. Well, I'm obviously a diver and a diving physician, and I guess you'd also call me a diving scientist. My background is that probably like many of the people listening, I became passionate about diving when I was very young. We grew up in a little seaside suburb in Wellington, New Zealand, and it was just what the kids did. You know, we all went snorkeling, and from that point on, diving or fulfilling some passion in diving or some ambition in diving drove pretty much my entire life. So I initially did marine biology and then went into medicine because of my diving passion. The moment I finished medical school, I went and joined the Navy to do diving medicine. And after that was in hyperbaric medicine for a while, and then progressed into anesthesiology, and that's kind of where I am today, career-wise. But in terms of diving, one of the fabulous things about diving as a sport is you can reinvent yourself multiple times over a very long diving career. You know, so it started out with snorkeling and then spearfishing and then scuba diving, and then there was the military rebreathers and wrecks and caves, and then photography. And photography is the kind of ultimate thing because you can never say that you've taken the best photograph. There's always a better photo to take. So these days it's mainly wrecks, deep wrecks, occasionally a bit of cave stuff. Well, we don't have a lot of cave in New Zealand. Yeah, still very active, and I kind of dedicate my research career to both diving related things and also stuff in anesthesiology that's kind of compatible with it, like, you know, human factors issues in medicine, which has a lot of spillover into the diving world as well. But yeah, that's me. And I think one of the things I like about my career is that um, I've taken this interest in diving and made it part of my career. And so I kind of understand divers. So I get, you know, I get what the issues are for them, and I understand their language and all that kind of stuff. And a big passion for me is doing exactly what we're doing now, which is trying to connect with the diving community and, provide good educational material.
Yeah, and we
Perfect.
were speaking just for a moment before we started recording that sort of about the, you know, especially with technical diving, getting and people getting involved in, as I and you and Ben also with, you know, a lot of the stuff peripheral to diving, you know, in terms of management of a technical dive and the decompression and the gear and stuff like that is, you know, also part of the fun of it. So there's that element that's really cool. So.
Well,
Yeah,
it
Ben.
totally is. And if the diving itself, like the time, the minutes spent underwater was all that it was about, I don't think people would do it because, in comparison to the amount of preparation and
Mm,
education and all that stuff you need, the amount of time you actually get underwater is quite small. And I think a big component is exactly what you just said, Jeff. I think that learning about it, learning about the constraints and the physiology and the things you've got to plan for and overcome, having that knowledge, the technophile aspect of all the equipment, I think that that's a huge part of the fun of it, and why a lot of people stay passionate about it. Certainly true for me, and I guess for many others as well.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure.
Ben.
I totally agree with you. And also, I think it's amazing that how young the diving industry is and how fast the development has gone over the last years. I think that's also, for me at least, a very big driving force to to stay active as a student as well as an instructor. Like really trying to suck up new knowledge wherever you can find it. And I think because of the diving industry now, partly also thanks to people like you with a wealth of knowledge and the willingness to share that with us mere mortals, is fantastic. And I think that's helping out the diving industry a lot. I think because if you take a parallel to any other industry, that would probably not happen. Someone like you would just say, I have all this knowledge, this is my price.
Mhm.
So I think it's great because you can see that the majority of the diving industry is still carried by this passion for the sport.
Mm.
And even though it's a big industry at the moment, but especially for a small player like us, UTD, we heavily rely on the passionate interaction of our instructors, and for sure that's something that we uh, take pride in. So yeah.
Yeah, we did get into this because we're a training agency, right? I mean, we are about education first and
Yeah.
everything
Exactly.
else second. So,
Yeah.
all right, well let's start. Let's see. So where should we start this?
Yeah. Well, that kind of answers the question. The first question I had: what came first for you, Simon? Was it the anesthesiology or the doctor part, or the diving part? And I guess you already answered that. It's probably the diving that led to the other. Um, and it's interesting to hear that now you're in the lucky position that you can only pick and choose your subjects of research to fit also your diving inquisitive mind, and that can bring benefit to us again. So I think that's really nice.
Now
One of the things,
you're not the only anesthesiologist to sort of head into hyperbaric medicine. You want to Can you do like 2 minutes on how those two things connect?
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I'm often asked about it. Well, there's some natural linkages between anesthesiology and diving medicine. One is clearly that that they both involve gas physiology. They also, like every single day of an anesthesiologist's working life, they sit and watch a circle circuit and how it behaves when it's
Mm.
connected to a human. So that has a clear linkage into the use of rebreathers, which are fundamentally very sophisticated circle circuits. So there's a lot of those kind of, I guess you'd call them theoretical or knowledge-based things that link straight into diving. Also, anesthesiologists tend to be quite adventurous individuals, and anesthesiology is a sessional specialty, so you can kind of adapt your life around it quite well, and it suits a lot of people with an adventurous mindset who can do a list and then go for a dive. It's not like you have a ward full of patients that you're looking after back in the hospital.
Mm.
So there are those things. The other thing that anesthesiology brings to diving is that anesthesiologists are very skilled in managing critically ill patients, and it's a medical specialty that provides you with that suite of skills that you probably feel you might need if you were, say, for example, in a remote location and there was a diving accident, and you're the kind of the only person, you can't ring an ambulance, or you haven't got that kind of backup, but you yourself have that suite of skills that's required to manage a critically ill person. So it's quite a nice, along with emergency medicine and one or two things like intensive care, like things like that. Anesthesiology is a good specialty for a field, a high-end field diver to have. So, there's multiple linkages, but I think that those are probably the key ones. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's lots of anesthesiologists around the world who are also divers, some very well-known ones, Andy Pitkin in Florida in the United States, and Richard Harris, Andrew Fock in Australia. Richard Harris was the anaesthetist who's a very good friend of mine. He was the anaesthetist who anesthetized the boys in the cave in Thailand when they rescued them a couple of years ago. So there's some good examples of people in our specialty who are anesthesiologists and who are anesthesiologists and also high-end technical divers.
Yeah. All right, so let's guide this.
I can attest to that, Simon, that they're adventurous people, because one of my best friends is an anesthesiologist as well. And during my bachelor party, they had a kind of a conspiracy beneath the boys that they were gonna like paralyze my left arm for the whole day and see how I would cope. Luckily, that didn't happen, but it goes to show the twisted minds you can deal with sometimes. So that was good fun. Happened to be a normal bachelor party in Amsterdam, so as far as that goes, normal. But yeah, they're adventurous, that's for sure.
Right.
So one of the things I'd like to discuss was with regards to decompression stress, and then mainly what your thoughts are on the other factors surrounding the decompression stress. And I think too many people get too hung up on the numbers game, right? I mean, this profile versus that profile, in a minute here at that depth, or a minute there 3 meters shallower, and that's a huge difference. And I think, given the fact that we've seen so many smaller researches pop up over the recent years, we've been a part of it ourselves in Italy and following it along. You see, well, at least I see, when you read between the lines, there are more and more factors coming out that indicate that there are many, many, many more nuanced parts of the decompression stress we endure as divers that have nothing to do with the on-gas, off-gas process, that is more related to other parts of our physiology, immune response, simple nutrition questions about what kind of, energy systems we're burning during the dive, and what has an effect on the immune response as a response of that. Because the more carbohydrates we burn, the more oxidative stress that puts on our muscles, and that might tie into the whole decompression stress. So is there anything new with regards to that you can shine a light on?
Or old?
Well, yeah.
Or old.
So look, your initial premise, Ben, is exactly correct. So what people tend to focus on is the time depth profile and how we arrange that. And look, there's no question that's important. If you do a decompression dive and then miss all your decompression, you're going to get decompression sickness, right? So that is important. But there's, as you've correctly alluded to, there's this whole spectrum of things surrounding that can modify it in a potentially very important way. Now, some of these things we know about, and some of them we don't know about. We speculate that they exist, but we are not sure about them. And you touched on elements of both there. But and in terms of new, well, I'm not, it's difficult for me to know what your listeners know about or don't know about already, but I'll just touch on a few of the most important ones. So first of all, we could talk about some physiological things that are, not related to the decompression profile. One absolutely classic example that has become very clear to us over the last, say, 30 years is the presence of right to left shunts in the body. So these are communications between the venous system and the arterial system that allow bubbles that we form in the venous system pretty much after every dive. It usually get filtered out by the lung circulation to get from the veins to the arteries, these tiny little bubbles, and they can go on and then do more, do more harm by getting onto the arterial side of the circulation. So the most common the most common one of these is the so-called patent foramen ovale, the small communication between the right and left sides of the heart, which is open during fetal life. Your materials cover it quite well. I've had a look at that, and in a proportion of people that does not heal after birth, which it's supposed to do, and so it remains there, and bubbles can get across from one side to the other. That has become clear. It's become very clear that that's an unequivocal risk factor for neurological decompression sickness, particularly if it's large and it allows lots of bubbles and lots of blood to cross. So that's one example. On the physiological side, though, there are almost certainly other things, and you kind of alluded to that a little bit. You started talking about diet and the effects, for example, of exercise. Some of these things we've scratched the surface of, some not so much. Like, for example, there's been quite a lot of effort put into trying to figure out how exercise can affect the risk of decompression sickness, and exercise at different phases of the dive. So for example, just very quickly, I mean, exercise before a dive may actually be protective. There's some pretty strong animal evidence that suggests that. That's never really been followed up in the human realm to any great extent. There are several human experiments that show that exercise, good aerobic type exercise in the 24 hours prior to a dive reduces bubble formation after a dive, but those studies are very small. Then if you look at exercise during a dive, there's pretty good evidence that if you exercise hard at the bottom when you're in-gassing, that improves circulation around the body, and so you accelerate in-gassing. So that's a risk factor. And then there's some evidence that gentle exercise during the decompression might help you get rid of gas because you're keeping the circulation going during decompression. And then there's some evidence that exercise after a dive can be disadvantageous, can be a risk factor, because you increase right to left shunting across a PFO or across a pulmonary shunt. And it can it's a bit like shaking a Coke bottle, for want of a better analogy. So the exercise profile is another one of these physiological things. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff around genetics, and to what extent the individual's genetics can affect their response to, you've talked about this in your materials, the immune response to the presence of bubbles, or the inflammatory response. And we do see evidence for differences in this between individual people, and those differences probably mediated by genetics potentially. And that's a field we've never really dug into deeply, and other people want to. So those are a few examples of physiological things. And then there's a few kind of dive related things that are not profile related. So a good example of that would be the temperature profile of the dive. So probably the most amazing evidence for significant impact on risk that I've seen in the last 10 years is that the publication by NEDU, where they manipulated temperature in divers during decompression, and found extraordinary differences in the risk of developing decompression sickness symptoms. So in particular, if you were warm during the bottom phase of the dive and cold during the decompression, that increased the risk by an order of magnitude. It was a stunning result. And if you think about it, that's actually what happens to most of us. We're warm at the start of a dive and we get cold later on. So trying to preserve our temperature to prevent that from happening is an important part of safe dive planning. So the opposite was actually true. So being cold at the start of a dive and warm during the decompression was the safest thing. Unfortunately, that's quite hard to achieve at a practical level. Like, we don't really want to intentionally make ourselves cold at the start of a dive. But probably what we should be aiming for as divers is to stay warm the entire, like stay at the same temperature. That's a kind of practical thing you could do.
Yeah.
And that should be an aim for us. But though, just to the point of your question, there's quite a lot of stuff you could talk about there. In fact, we could probably spend the whole
For sure.
time talking about that as a subject alone. But those are a few examples of physiological and sort of dive related factors that can quite significantly impact on risk of decompression sickness that are separate to the dive profile, which was your original point. We all focus on the dive profile. And I'm not saying it's not important, of course it is, but there are lots of other things that can impact on an individual's risk on any particular day.
Yeah, exactly.
I just want to stay on the heat thing for just another moment, because we learned about this, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago from a U.S. Navy study or U.S. Navy experience that happened when an airplane crashed in a river near Washington, D.C. And it was very cold. And the people who were in the hot water suits were getting dramatically less problems than the people who were not. So they started to experiment with that and found exactly what you said, that the cold on the dive, warm on the ascent was the best thing to do. And we've always looked at that with heating equipment, heating vests and heating belts and all that other stuff, that leave them off, turn them on the ascent and bring your skin temperature up. So, but it's interesting because, these are the things that I think are really important, that we look at the theory of decompression and we apply it to our daily diving.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, with the advent now of heated undergarments that are more and more, sorry, readily available, I think more divers are adopting that. Although there's a caveat there, and for you listeners out there, just be aware: don't use the heated equipment as a way to negate thicker undergarments.
Yeah,
because the heated
breaks.
stuff breaks. It's
breaks.
electronics underwater, just a matter of time, and then you're really in a world of hurt, because then you're actually doing what you're not supposed to do. Then you're being nice and warm in the beginning, and then you'll be cold at the end of the dive.
You know what? We're going to do a whole
Probably doing it on
podcast
a long
on.
dive.
We're going to do a whole podcast on heat. I love this topic.
Yeah, we did one on how to stay warm, so I think that's a good extra.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
I agree, and I think also from your point of view, Simon, when we look at those aspects of a decompression stress on the body, those are even more difficult to research, because the further down you go that rabbit hole, the more subjective these studies become, I guess. Even now, just the profile is dependent on a person's physiology and like you said, maybe even genetics. So going down a rabbit hole of nutrition and inflammatory system has to take into account the whole lifestyle of this person, and that's probably going to be very hard to do.
Well, that's a really good point, Ben, and it's worth emphasizing actually. All of these things are incredibly difficult to study, because it's a relatively simple thing to get your head around. But if you want to, if you're trying to assess the impact of some kind of manipulation of risk, then that requires standardization of everything else, which is incredibly hard to achieve, as you just pointed out, and it requires big numbers.
Yeah.
Lots of dive repetitions. I mean, you guys know this from your own experience with that study that UTD did in Italy.
Yeah.
That was a big undertaking, what looked like 5 years, right? So, and for a relatively small number of dives. But what you really need is hundreds and hundreds of dives, and it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. And people probably wonder from time to time, why don't we make faster progress in this field? Well, actually, it's really hard to do. And also, we struggle with a lack of accurate endpoints for experiments. So like, what we're all talking about here is trying to prevent decompression sickness, right? But running experiments with decompression sickness as the end point is actually quite a difficult, like it's a hard sell to an ethics committee, to an IRB. And the US Navy's managed to do it, and they've run. That's what makes some of their experiments so extraordinary. Is that the NEDU deep stop study, that temperature study, they've used decompression sickness as an endpoint, and there are very few places in the world where you'd be able to do that. And so we use these other endpoints, which are quite imperfect, like bubble counts, which have an imprecise relationship to actual risk of decompression sickness. So we actually struggle, at multiple levels in this kind of research. We do struggle, and we find that it's difficult. And so, just in case the wider world of divers are like losing faith in their scientists, you have to understand that this is a hard field to run experiments in.
Yeah.
The guy we talked to at DEMA from the Navy said they bent a lot of people, but they were soldiers. So
yeah, it's just, sir, yes, sir, I'll get bent. No, I talked to Dr. Marioni from Dan Europe 2 years ago at the boot show about their their diver registration software that is open to all divers to use to upload profiles and describe their diving experience. And I think the future is probably going to be more aligned on this citizen scientist approach, because that bypasses that ethics problem. Because if they take data in from people that got bent without having to ask, can you please go and get bent, it's easier. And I think maybe also companies like ODive, that little portable Doppler thing that's now out there, I think those things are probably going to pop up more to help, the general field of science, I guess.
But you're so right that the sample size is so small. I mean, I read scientific studies, and 1,200, 1,500 people is a small sample. Double blind, double try, and so in Italy we had 30 divers doing 4 dives, something like that.
Yeah, at the end, yeah.
That's right. No, it's really hard. And the other thing is funding. Like you try going to an organization like the NIH or its equivalent in any of the countries that we live in and say, look, I want research money to study the complications of a discretionary recreational activity that's indulged in mainly by white middle-class males, and they're just going to laugh at you, because that's the truth of diving. It's mainly, white males who are, reasonably well off, because that's the people who can afford to do this kind of thing. I mean, and research bodies aren't interested in funding that kind of thing. So you've got to get creative about where you get research money from, and it's hard. It's a really difficult subject to study, and for that reason, the pace of progress is glacial. And your point about citizen science is exactly right. I mean, that is one avenue. The trouble with it is that the more you emphasize data from those kind of sources, the more variability you get in the way that the dives have been conducted, and the less control you have over the variables involved. Like ideally, when you're doing an experiment to try and identify that factor X is important in decompression sickness, you should have everything else standardized. When you throw that open to the world of citizen science, you don't standardize anything, because everyone does slightly different stuff. So it becomes very difficult to interpret. Now, I mean, I don't want to sound too nihilistic about this. I'm just pointing out there are challenges to doing it. It's not impossible, and we are making progress. It's just a bit slow. That's all.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're all a bunch of test pilots without training.
Well, I think as well, and I think people, and nowadays, I think that's one of the upsides of this, openness in the whole industry about, you know, everything is available online. People can read
Yeah.
studies, people can, you know, put in effort to educate themselves. And I think that's also something we heavily try to convey to our instructors and they to their students, to never sit on your laurels and just expect information to be delivered to you at 100% face value. I mean, go out there and you know, challenge whoever posts whatever is being posted. You know, do your own research, because things are exponentially in the way we learn things. And I think that ties into the next thing I have on my list here, and that's something about gas density
Hmm.
and mainly the CO2 buildup because of breathing a dense gas.
Hmm.
Um, Good stuff. That was very interesting. All right. Thank you for watching part one. Join us for part two, where we dive all into gas density and what that has of an effect on us as divers. So join us for part two, and we'll see you there. Remember to like and subscribe, by the way.